In this section, Lofink points out that the gathering of God's scattered people, the gathering of the scattered people of God, has been a major, a fundamental statement in Israel's theology since the Babylonian exile. He cites chapter 30 of Deuteronomy, right, where they talk about gathering the people back together that have been dispersed to the farthest corners of the earth, right? And the writer says, even from there the Lord will gather you, right, and bring you back. He'll bring you back to the land your ancestors possessed, and you'll have the land back again, and he'll make you more prosperous and numerous than before, right? It's going to be even better when they come back, when they're gathered together and brought back to the land, right? And this time the Lord is going to circumcise their hearts. That means it's not just going to be an external sign, right? They're just not going to follow the covenant externally. The exile is actually going to help them, right? That's the idea. And so that their hearts will now be in it, and that they'll actually love the Lord. It won't just be external signs of religiosity that Lofink talks about. They're really going to live it. It's going to be that new society that God promised Abraham, right? With your whole heart and your whole being, that you can live. Again, what are they talking about? They're talking about salvation. They're talking about the dream here. They're talking about what God is introducing to the world through Abraham. Better way of life. So we see the Babylonian exile wasn't the end of Israel. If it learns and repents, right? This is what the prophet's talking about. This is what the Deuteronomistic writer is getting at, right? God will bring it back to the land, form a new covenant, big theme in Jeremiah. And again, a better one, not external, one of the heart, where they really live as the people of God. Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah, they all talk about this gathering of Israel from those who were scattered. And the scattering was the Babylonian exile. And also, though, the northern tribes, the other tribes, right? They were not part of Judah. They were scattered too. There's some sense that they are also going to be restored. Gathering, kibbutz, becomes a technical term for the bringing of salvation. All right, you see, Hebrew doesn't have vowels, so a lot of times you'll see there's Hebrew words, and people debate how they were pronounced because there are no vowels, right? So we'll go with kibbutz, like in kibbutz, right? A Jewish communal society, or neighborhood or community. Now, when the people are gathered back together, it's not their own initiative or by their own leadership. God brings them together. And the metaphor that we're familiar with is a shepherd, right? Like a shepherd gathers his flock. That's the way it works. The sheep aren't coming together by themselves. They're wandering off. The shepherd has to come bring back together. And this theme becomes so strong that it actually becomes parallel to the work of God in Exodus, right? As Jeremiah writes about it. Right, the days are coming when they won't say, as the Lord lives who brought the Israelites out of the land of Egypt, but as the Lord lived who brought the descendants of the house of Israel up from the land of the north. Right? And from the land which I banished them, brought them back, and they'll live there again. So they're really this gathering of the people from the exile and diaspora, how they're spread all over the earth after the exile. This is becoming just as big as the foundational event of the Israelites, the Exodus, when God freed them from slavery in Egypt. And when they come back together, there's going to be a healing, right? I said this is for the northern tribes too, right? So, you know that the north and south split after the reign of Solomon. And so by the time the exile comes, the northern tribes have already been defeated by the Syrians, and the southern tribes and the northern tribes have been split for hundreds of years. But when God restores, when God brings them back from the exile, he'll bring the nation together. He'll heal it You see, people who were split apart, they'll be brought back together. Again, there won't be that mistrust. There'll be community instead. There'll be a family again, right? Remember, this was Lofink's whole vision of what sin and what salvation is, right? Mistrust, that's the basis of sin. Being open to trusting, loving, caring for others. That's the new society. That's the salvation. That's the promised land. That's the Garden of Eden. That's the new city of Jerusalem. And that is the new Israel after the Jews learn their lesson in the exile. The aim of the gathering is reconciliation. The gathering is reconciliation. You're coming back together, right? Like what are you coming back together? You're reconciling right there. It's part of it. You know, if you've ever had a break with someone, right? If you ever had a stress in a relationship, or with a group of people, right? Or you've been part of one group that is split from another group. How does it come back? Well, you come back together. That is reconciliation in itself. Hey, let's get back together and do what we used to do. Let's be one group again. In this case, let's be one family again. Let's be one people. Here's the same theme in Ezekiel. Right? The gathering together is also reconciliation. It's a restoration of the true community, of the free society, right? The new and better life. Jesus, no surprise, right? Jesus was Jewish. He uses the same language and metaphor. Now, he's not talking about the exact same thing, but the symbolism, just like the Exodus, right? Freedom from slavery has become so strong, such a big part of the tradition, that it can be applied in different ways. And Lofink's going to say one of the reasons that is because that's how Israel was formed. It goes back to the foundations, guys, of this idea of salvation being equated with gathering together, right? That's how we are saved. Again, it makes sense when you understand what Lofink is talking about as salvation. You know, what paradise is. What redemption, what liberation, what justification all involves. Coming back into community, a community of trust. So in the Bible, in Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Joshua, you have the story of these 12 tribes that are the 12 sons of one guy, right? Jacob / Israel, right? Whose grandfather was Abraham. That's metaphorical, right? Think about it. Like in the Bible, they're all in one. They're all in Egypt, and then they all just leave together, like they're just together the whole time in the desert. Then they all go into Israel together. It doesn't sound very realistic, you know. I mean, if you just think about the history of the world, but Lofink says it was supposed to function as a metaphor, right? Because when we look at Judges in the Bible, it gives a different picture. You know, there's different views on this. There's different histories about how the Israelites came to be in the Bible itself. And Judges doesn't give this, 12 sons of Jacob all hanging out together for, 400 years in Egypt and then busting out together and going through the desert together for 40 years and then doing a military conquest of Israel under Joshua. Right? Judges tells the story a little differently, right? Or a lot differently. Archaeological evidence also tells a different story. So this idea of gathering is essential to the very foundations of the Israelite people if you look at like how it seems that they actually formed. Not the symbolic story that we see in Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Joshua, which, by the way, is a good metaphor, because what they're saying is that all these different people, we'll see, that actually made up the Israelites, they're all one family, right? It's like an ethos. It's like a way that they're talking about themselves. You know, they would have known, that it was a metaphor.